The Justice Forum of Savannah buzzed with activity on that April morning. Reporters, photographers, and onlookers crowded the corridors of the majestic neoclassical building in the historic center of the capital of Georgia. No one wanted to miss the trial that the local press had already dubbed the Kevin case. Kevin Thompson, a 14-year-old boy who had grown up on the streets of Savannah's historic district, stood alone, without a lawyer, facing the powerful judge, Richard Montgomery, known for his severity and inflexibility, especially with young offenders. The charge: theft of a watch from a store in the Savannah Mall. Seated in the defendant's chair, Kevin looked tiny. His unkempt curly hair and simple clothes contrasted sharply with the solemnity of the courtroom, but his deep brown eyes reflected a rare intelligence and a disturbing determination for someone so young. Case number 47892, State versus Kevin Thompson, announced the bailiff. Judge Montgomery adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and examined the documents before him. At 58, with impeccably combed gray hair and a perpetually stern expression, the judge was the picture of authority. The son of American diplomats, he had built his career in the United States and gained notoriety for the rigidity of his sentences. "Does the defendant have legal representation?" he asked, without looking up from the documents. Kevin stood up, with a surprisingly composed posture. "No, Your Honor, I will represent myself." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge finally looked up, meeting the young boy's eyes. For a brief moment, something indescribable crossed his face. "Are you aware, young man, that you have the right to a public defender?" "Yes, Your Honor, but I prefer to defend myself if the court allows." Prosecutor Sophia Williams, a 40-year-old woman with a delicate face that hid a relentless personality, rose from her seat. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The defendant is a minor and has no legal qualifications." Montgomery gestured for her to sit down. "It is unusual, but not illegal." He turned back to Kevin. "Do you understand the gravity of the situation? The consequences?" "I understand perfectly, Your Honor." In the back rows of the courtroom sat Taylor Reynolds, a journalist from the Savannah Times who had stumbled upon the trial, expecting only to fulfill her daily assignment. With short blonde hair and attentive green eyes, she could already sense that she was witnessing something extraordinary. She discreetly opened her notebook and began taking notes. Prosecutor Sophia began her presentation, enumerating the evidence against Kevin: the testimony of the store security guard, the CCTV footage, and the watch found near the location where the boy had been detained. A teenager with no fixed address, no formal education, and a history of petty crimes, concluded Sophia. The state requests the application of a closed socio-educational measure to prevent future behavioral deviations. When it was Kevin's turn, silence filled the room. He stood up, took a deep breath, and, to everyone's astonishment, began speaking with an eloquence that seemed impossible for someone of his age and background. "Your Honor, I respect this court and its commitment to justice," he began. "However, I must point out that the evidence presented against me violates basic principles of admissibility under Article 5, Section LVI of the Federal Constitution." Judge Montgomery's face slowly transformed. Initial surprise gave way to skepticism, then to genuine attention. Kevin methodically dismantled each point of the accusation, citing case law, pointing out procedural flaws, and highlighting contradictions in the testimonies. The video footage presented shows only someone with physical characteristics similar to mine, but the quality does not allow for conclusive identification. Moreover, the watch was not found in my possession but was discarded 50 meters from where I was apprehended, with no direct evidence linking me to the object. Taylor Reynolds watched in awe. As a reporter, she had covered hundreds of trials, but she had never witnessed anything like this. Where did this knowledge come from? How could a street kid cite constitutional articles and legal precedents with the precision of an experienced lawyer? In the public gallery, a middle-aged man observed intently, with an interest that went beyond mere curiosity. Joshua Parker, director of the NGO New Paths, dedicated to discovering and supporting young talents in vulnerable communities in Savannah, couldn't take his eyes off Kevin. His fingers drummed on his knee, restless, while his mind calculated possibilities. "Your Honor," Kevin continued, "I am not here to deny the reality of the streets or the difficulties I have faced. I am here to question why the system that should protect me is the same one that judges me without offering the same opportunities given to others." Judge Montgomery adjusted his posture. Something about this boy intrigued him deeply. "Continue, Mr. Thompson." Kevin looked directly into the judge's eyes. "If justice is truly blind, Your Honor, why do its eyes only open to see those who have the least?" A tomb-like silence fell over the courtroom. Kevin's question hung in the air like an accusation against the entire system. Judge Montgomery removed his glasses, rubbed his tired eyes, and stared at the young boy with a renewed expression, no longer of disdain, but of genuine interest. "Mr. Thompson, where did you learn constitutional law?" he finally asked. Kevin adjusted his posture. "On the streets of Savannah's historic district, Your Honor. I learned to read with discarded books from the public library. When I discovered legal books, I realized they were the tools that could protect me in a world that rarely looks at people like me." The revelation caused a stir. Prosecutor Sophia seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Her case was being dismantled by a teenager with no formal education. Taylor Reynolds typed furiously on her notebook. Her story was taking an unexpected turn. Wasn't just about a theft case, but about a prodigy emerging from the adversities of Savannah's streets. The journalist then noticed the man in the blue suit, who was watching Kevin with intensity. Joshua Parker exuded an aura of discreet power, with analytical eyes that didn't miss a single movement of the young boy. "May I speak, Your Honor?" Joshua said, standing up. His deep, confident voice immediately captured the court's attention. The judge frowned. "And you are?" "Joshua Parker, director of the NGO New Paths. I have been following cases like Kevin's for years, and I would like to present some considerations to the court, if I may." Montgomery hesitated, but his interest was visibly piqued. "Proceed, Mr. Parker." Joshua walked to the front of the courtroom with measured steps. Tall, with broad shoulders and salt and pepper hair, he had the presence that years of working with power institutions had molded. "Your Honor, our organization has been monitoring exceptional young people in vulnerable situations. Kevin Thompson caught our attention 6 months ago when we saw him teaching basic legal concepts to other street kids." Kevin looked surprised at Joshua. He had never imagined he was being observed. "The IQ test we discreetly administered, with permission from local authorities, revealed an exceptional result: 157 points. We are witnessing a singular intelligence that the system failed to identify and nurture." A murmur spread through the room. Judge Montgomery gestured for silence. "We have a structural problem, Your Honor," Joshua continued. "How many Kevins have we lost on the streets because the state cannot identify and cultivate exceptional talents in unlikely environments? This trial could be a turning point, not just for this young man, but for our approach as a society." Prosecutor. Sophia stood up, visibly irritated. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this does not change the facts of the case. We are here to judge a crime, not to discuss social policies." Judge Montgomery interrupted her. "Ms. Williams, justice does not exist in a vacuum. Context is relevant to any fair trial." He turned to Kevin. "Continue your defense, Mr. Thompson." Kevin nodded gratefully and resumed with renewed confidence. "Article 227 of the Federal Constitution establishes that it is the duty of the family, society, and the state to ensure, with absolute priority, the right to education for children and adolescents. However, Your Honor, I have never had adequate access to this right. My self-education was my only way out." Taylor, watching from the gallery, felt increasingly moved by the boy's determination. Discreetly, she took out her phone and began recording. "The alleged evidence against me was obtained without a proper judicial warrant," Kevin continued, opening a worn-out book he had brought with him. "According to the precedent set in the State v. Mendez case of 2018, ruled by the Superior Court of Justice, the search conducted constitutes an illegal search, making the evidence inadmissible." Judge Montgomery's face now showed barely disguised admiration. He quickly flipped through his own documents, verifying the references Kevin cited. At the back of the room, an elegant woman entered discreetly and sat in the last row. Melissa Montgomery, the judge's wife, rarely attended her husband's trials. However, an anonymous phone call had alerted her to something extraordinary happening that morning. Her sharp blue eyes, as perceptive as her husband's, fixed on Kevin with growing interest. "Your Honor," Kevin concluded his argument, "I am not asking for special treatment. I am only asking that the law be applied equally, without prejudice based on my social condition. The presumption of innocence should not be a privilege but a universal right." Judge Montgomery interlaced his fingers, deep in thought. In 40 years on the bench, he had never faced such a dilemma. The law was clear, but it rarely presented itself. With such eloquence from someone so young and without resources. Joshua Parker stepped forward again. "Your Honor, if I may suggest, New Paths is willing to take responsibility for young Kevin, offering him housing, formal education, and psychological support, regardless of the outcome of this trial." Taylor Reynolds watched the scene with growing admiration. In her mind, she was already formulating the headline for her article, "The Boy Who Challenged the System." This was not just a story about a trial, but about a society's failure to recognize extraordinary potential hidden in the most unlikely places. Then Judge Montgomery did something unexpected. He stood up, asked everyone to remain seated, and walked until he was face to face with Kevin. "Young Mr. Thompson, in all my years on the bench, I have never witnessed such an articulate defense from someone your age, let alone without legal training." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "I have just one question. If I give you the opportunity you so richly deserve, what do you intend to do with it?" Kevin held the judge's gaze without hesitation. "I would change the system from within, Your Honor, so that no other child has to learn the law just to survive on the streets." Judge Montgomery returned to his seat with slow steps, as if carrying the weight of a decision that transcended this specific case. The courtroom remained in absolute silence, all eyes divided between the judge and the young Kevin, who remained standing with a dignity that was disconcerting for his 14 years. "This court will recess for 30 minutes, announced Montgomery, banging his gavel. As the judge retreated to his private chamber, the buzz filled the room. Taylor Reynolds took the opportunity to approach Joshua Parker. "Mr. Parker, Taylor Reynolds from the Savannah Times. I would like to understand more about the work of New Paths and how you identified Kevin." Joshua smiled, revealing small wrinkles around his eyes that spoke of years of hard work. "Ms. Reynolds, there is an invisible phenomenon happening on the streets of Savannah. Brilliant minds that the system failed to embrace are creating their own methods of survival and learning." Taylor glanced toward Kevin, who was flipping through his worn-out books, completely absorbed. How did he acquire such specific legal knowledge? Kevin frequented the Savannah Public Library almost daily. The staff noticed him reciting entire paragraphs of legal codes from memory. "That's when our team decided to observe him." Joshua lowered his voice. "What we discovered was extraordinary. He had created his own mnemonic system to memorize laws and precedents, something that even law students from the best universities struggle to do with such efficiency." On the other side of the room, Melissa Montgomery discreetly approached the young boy. "You are truly extraordinary, Kevin," she said softly. The teenager looked up, surprised. "Thank you, ma'am." Melissa Montgomery, the judge's wife. She smiled at the boy's astonished expression. "Don't worry, I'm not here to influence the case. I just wanted to meet the young man who is making my husband rethink decades of jurisprudence." Melissa, a university professor of English literature, had a special interest in exceptional minds. "You know, Kevin, Richard wasn't always so inflexible. There was a time when he believed in rehabilitation over punishment." Before Kevin could respond, the bailiff announced the judge's return. Everyone quickly returned to their seats. Montgomery sat down with a grave expression. For a few moments he simply examined the papers before him, as if searching for answers. In the lines of the documents, finally he looked up. "This is not an ordinary case," he began, "and not just because of the legal merits presented by the defendant, which I must admit are substantial and technically correct. Prosecutor Sophia Williams seemed resigned. She knew she had lost the case the moment Kevin began citing case law. The judicial system does not exist solely to punish, but to correct social distortions and ensure that justice is truly just, Montgomery continued. In the case at hand, I find significant procedural flaws that compromise the admissibility of the evidence presented. A murmur of excitement spread through the room. Taylor typed furiously, capturing every word. Furthermore, the judge went on, the defense presented by Mr. Thompson demonstrates not only legal innocence, but an exceptional ability that the state, in all its structure, failed to identify and nurture. He paused significantly. It is a systemic failure that this court cannot ignore. Sophia Williams stood up. Your Honor, with all due respect, the role of this court is to judge the specific case, not to reform the educational or social assistance system. Ms. Williams, Montgomery replied firmly, when the system fails so spectacularly to provide equal opportunities, it is precisely the role of the judiciary to correct this imbalance. This is the fundamental principle of legal equity. Kevin watched the exchange with a serene expression. For the first time in his young life, he felt truly seen. Therefore, the judge continued, I declare the charges against Kevin Thompson unfounded due to insufficient evidence and irreparable procedural flaws. Montgomery paused as if considering something deeper, but my decision does not end here. An expectant silence filled the room. Even the most experienced lawyers present could not predict what would come next. This court, using the prerogatives provided by the Child and Adolescent Statute, orders that Kevin Thompson be referred to the New Paths program with quarterly judicial supervision. Montgomery looked directly at Joshua Parker. Mr. Parker, is your program prepared to cultivate exceptional talents like Kevin's? Joshua stood up. Absolutely, Your Honor. We have partnerships with the best educational institutions in the country and a personalized program for cases like his. Montgomery nodded. Additionally, this court establishes a special commission to identify other extraordinary talents in situations similar to Kevin's on the streets of Savannah. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Melissa Montgomery, an expert in advanced education, will chair this commission in partnership with New Paths. Taylor Reynolds could barely contain her excitement. This surpassed any expectation. It was not just a trial, but the birth of a social movement sanctioned by the judiciary. Finally, concluded Montgomery, I invite Mr. Thompson to return to this court in 6 months, not as a defendant, but as a special consultant in a pilot program I am ordering to be created, Youth Justice, to incorporate the perspective of exceptional talents like his in the reform of the juvenile justice system. Kevin remained still, processing what he had just heard. It wasn't just his freedom that was being declared, but a recognition of his value as an individual and the potential of his singular mind. Court is adjourned, declared Montgomery, banging the gavel. The buzz exploded in the room. Journalists rushed to their phones, lawyers discussed the legal implications, and at the center of it all, Kevin remained standing as if he couldn't believe what had happened. Joshua Parker approached the young boy. Ready to start your new life, Kevin? Before he could respond, a familiar figure approached, Judge Montgomery, now without his robe. Mr. Thompson, he said, extending his hand, today you taught me more about justice than my 40 years on the bench. Thank you. Taylor Reynolds watched the scene with tears in her eyes. In her 15 years of journalism, she had never witnessed anything so powerful. As Kevin shook the judge's hand, she understood that this was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a quiet revolution in the system. 6 months later, the Youth Justice Program had already identified 17 other teenagers with exceptional talents on the streets of Savannah. Kevin, now a student in an advanced program and a special assistant to Judge Montgomery, had become a symbol of hope. In her new weekly column in the Savannah Times titled Invisible Voices, Taylor Reynolds documented these stories of transformation. The first edition, about Kevin, had gone viral nationally, inspiring similar initiatives in other cities. Not all revolutions begin with grand demonstrations, she wrote in her conclusion. Some begin with a simple question asked by a street kid in a courtroom. If justice is blind, why do the eyes of the law only turn to those who have the least? And somewhere in Savannah, other young people were beginning to find their own voices, inspired by the story of the boy who challenged the system and transformed it from within. A year had passed since the historic trial that forever changed Savannah's judicial system. The Youth Justice Program had expanded to 5 states, with Kevin Thompson as its official ambassador. The partnership between Judge Richard Montgomery and Joshua Parker had resulted in a national foundation dedicated to identifying and developing exceptional talents in vulnerable communities. Melissa Montgomery now coordinated a mentorship program connecting university professors to promising young people from the outskirts. Kevin, about to turn 16, divided his time between accelerated studies and lectures at public schools, where he shared his story to inspire other young people to find their own path. Taylor Reynolds had turned her Invisible Voices column into a best-selling book, documenting the transformation stories that began in that courtroom. Her friendship with Kevin flourished, with the journalist becoming a mentor to the young prodigy. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Kevin walked through Savannah's historic district, the same place where he had grown up. But now he wasn't walking alone. By his side were his new colleagues from the program, other exceptional young people discovered thanks to the initiative his story had inspired. "You know what I've learned this year?" Kevin said to a 12-year-old girl who had recently joined the program. "That sometimes a single voice can make all the difference. A single question can change an entire system." The girl smiled, still shy about her new reality. "Do you think I can make a difference too?" Kevin looked at the horizon of Savannah, with its colonial churches and the blue sea in the background. "I am absolutely sure. Each of us has a special talent waiting to be discovered. The secret is not to let the world define who you should be." As they walked on, Kevin knew his journey was just beginning. The real revolution wasn't in the courtrooms or the headlines, but in the minds and hearts his story had touched, and in the countless invisible voices that were now beginning to be heard. Dear listeners, we hope Kevin Thompson's story has touched your hearts and inspired reflections on the extraordinary potential that exists in the most unlikely places. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about personal transformations and overcoming adversity. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this narrative about the young boy who challenged the judicial system has stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human life and the possibilities of social transformation. Share in the comments if you have witnessed or known stories of exceptional talents emerging from adverse circumstances. Your own experiences and reflections may inspire our next narrative. After all, as Kevin taught us, every voice matters, including yours. Until our next meeting, where new emotions, twists, and inspirations await.